Okay, so this year we decided to adopt for our climate panel a more global perspective than usual. In the last years, we have really focused a lot on intra-European issues, let's say, domestic issues. This year, we wanted to go more global. And the reason we decided to do that is that the current geopolitical landscape, in our view, calls for a fresh reflection on our approach to global action on climate and nature. The continuation of the war in Ukraine, the tragedy we see unfolding in front of our eyes in Gaza, the unprecedented trade tensions ignited by President Trump, the rise of populism, and the broader crisis of multilateralism certainly make action for global common goods, such as climate stability and nature preservation, even more difficult than before. And we think that this situation really calls for new, urgent, pragmatic solutions, also oriented at complementing the global governance architecture we currently have, such as, for example, the Paris Agreement, of which we celebrate the 10th anniversary, with new coalitions of the willing, aimed at accelerating the action in this field by embedding climate and nature objectives into the very fabric of international cooperation, meaning trade, finance, and of course, industrial policy. Coalitions of the willing that should in particular target a close cooperation between the advanced countries and the emerging markets and developing economies. Because that's where the fate of global climate stability and nature preservation and biodiversity outcomes will largely be determined as we move forward. Now, it happens that over the last 12 months, we at Bruegel have teamed up with the Center for Economic Policy Research, CEPR, and really try to join forces to rethink global action for climate and nature. And this collaboration predominantly led to the publication of a Paris report entitled Global Action Without Global Governance, Building Coalitions for Climate Transitions and Nature Restoration, which you can find available in both websites. A book edited by Jean, Beatrice, and Jeremy, which includes contributions of several leading scholars and practitioners in this field, including, by the way, Laurence with us today here. So this panel, to make a long story short, wants to build on this research endeavor and try to bring these key messages to the policy activity and debate that is opening with the new season, let's say, here in Brussels. Now, without much further ado, I would like to introduce you, our distinguished speakers, and say that we are really grateful to have you all with us today for this difficult but certainly necessary conversation. You will be hearing from Jean Pisani-Ferry, Senior Fellow at Bruegel, Beatrice Beder Di Mauro, President of CEPR, Kurt Vandenberge, Director General of DG Clima at the European Commission, Laurence Tubiana, CEO of the European Climate Foundation, and Francesca Agostinelli, Head of Enelix Global Retail. As you certainly have noticed, Executive Vice President Teresa Ribera had to cancel her participation today for a simple reason, that the College of Commissioners this morning is going to last longer than initially expected, the first college after, let's say, an eventful summer. So she asked me to bring her greetings and regards to you all, and we hope to have her soon at Bruegel for a dedicated conversation. The run of show of the panel is very, very simple. We will be having a presentation of the Paris report by Jean and Beatrice. We will be then moving to the panel discussion and finally opening it up to the question and answers. And on these, let me just send you a reminder that online participants are also warmly invited to join our conversation using Slido, and the hashtag for this panel is green. Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simone. It's a very good opportunity to present and discuss this report, which has not been properly launched. So it's, in a way, it's a first opportunity to have a wide discussion about it. You forgot to mention, actually, that you are a contributor to this report yourself. I'm going to make a presentation together with Beatrice. So this is the title, the cover of the report. There is also a code, a QR code, if you want to download it. And it's available on the websites of Bruegel and CPR. So we're going to have this presentation split. I'm going to present points 1 and 2, so the overall Paris report and the background, and Beatrice is going to go through the 4 pillars and have a deeper dive on carbon and natural markets. Let me skip that, and let me skip this, which is just a graphic illustration of what Simone said, and come to the core of the issue. So we are now, it's been 10 years since the Paris Agreement took place. It was a breakthrough because, and Laurence was obviously the architect behind it. There was a goal set, a common goal, and the possibility of, it was a sort of pledge and review mechanism. The individual countries had to indicate what they intended to do in terms of emission reductions, and the revision clause allowed to measure the success or not, the sufficiency of these efforts. Now, what we observed 10 years on is that it has worked in terms of governance. All countries essentially have contributed NDCs, but it hasn't worked in terms of reaching the goal, because the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, are insufficient, and moreover, they're not met. In fact, the carbon budget, consistent with 1.5 degrees, is nearly exhausted. And on top of that, the US is gone again. Is not, has withdrawn twice from the Paris Agreement. The observation the starting point is that the future of the planet, both of climate and biodiversity, depends increasingly on the emerging and developing countries. So why? Because they represent nowadays 2/3 of emissions. They're the part of the world where emissions are still rising is the emerging and developing world. Even the US is in a declining path in terms of emission. So that's one thing. And second, most biodiversity, most of the resources in terms of biodiversity, and most of the hotspots, by which it's meant that they are both resources and resources under threat, they're located in the south. So we are in a very difficult situation. And let me illustrate that with two graphs. The first graph is the rise and projected or required decline in emission for both advanced and developing countries. The advanced countries, the curve below in red, so they are not on track to reaching the goal consistent with 1.5 degrees. But at least, as I said, the emissions are declining. The emerging in developing countries, their emissions are still rising. And they're rising very fast. So you can see that 20 or 40 years ago, there was emissions were shared about equally between developing and advanced countries. Now it's mostly coming from developing countries. This is the loss of biodiversity, what's called the hotspots, that are territories on which there are biodiversity resources. There's a concentration of biodiversity resources. But those resources are under threat, are actually declining, and these are all the brown area. You see that covers a large part of Latin America, a large part of North Africa, a large part of East Africa. So the core of biodiversity, which is the Amazon, which is the rainforest in Africa, they're not under threat. But you see this kind of shrinking area for biodiversity. So we are starting also from the fact that climate and biodiversity are closely related. They are closely related because they mostly support each other. So it's not 100% correlation, but the degradation of climate and biodiversity, there are a number of chains through which they go hand in hand. So essentially responding to this twin crisis is the urgency we have, the global community has to deal with. About governance, what has been done so far, as I said, is that the mechanisms are not constraining. There are no mandatory obligations. There are no rules of the type like trade rules or IMF type of obligations, but there is a common commitment to reach those goals, and it has relied on global treaties. So the UNFCCC is a global treaty, the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework also. So the template has very much been the same, and the frameworks that give incentives to action by individual countries, they have relied on those global treaties. Now, the situation now is more complicated. It is more complicated because of the withdrawal of the US. It is also more complicated because a number of those countries, they reject the pressure from the northern countries to go faster, and you've followed certainly the various meetings, the various COPs, and the fact that the pace of change is really not up to what is needed. So what we are proposing in this report is to change the approach and to go for coalitions of the willing. So not necessarily global, certainly not, obviously, in the case of climate, without the US, not necessarily with all countries, even not counting the US, but basically having a set of incentive mechanisms that are conditional, for which membership is conditional on good behavior being defined in a certain way, and that depends on the coalition. Such coalition could be mutually reinforcing. So what we are proposing is a four-pillar architecture, which is going to be detailed by Beatrice. So the first mechanism is based on CBAM and the likes of CBAM. It's a tiered carbon coalition, so with different prices, but they all contribute in a way to reducing emissions. The second pillar is a climate finance coalition that would actually consist in commitments by a certain number of countries, mostly advanced countries, to finance decarbonization in the south. The third is the Green Industrial Partnership that the EU can form with the neighboring countries in order to deal with the issue of energy-intensive industries and what to do with them. And the proposal there is not to trade energy, but to trade energy-intensive products. So basically, to accept the offshoring of those industries. And the last one is the market for nature and carbon. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Jean, for setting us up and already giving the general architecture. I will give you a very brief glance, a little bit of a deeper look into these pillars, and then a bit of an even deeper look into the last one. But all of it remains, that's the warning, a teaser, because the whole report is 400 pages, and we do encourage you to look into those. What we have done in the first chapter as the conveners and the editors is try to build a consistent story which would allow us to think about what Jean has characterized as our new world in which we are living, and would still allow us to make progress in the direction that we need. So here on the first pillar, there is a full chapter that elaborates this proposal. This would be a coalition formed essentially around the CBAM and around carbon pricing, and the idea that that CBAM can be used as an incentive to enhance carbon pricing incentives in the rest of the world is not new, and that this can work as a form of carbon club is also something that has occurred to many people. But what is new in this proposal is that the incentive for countries to join is also tiered by having a tiered carbon price and a tiered price for the CBAM. In other words, the entry price for poorer countries would be lower than the one for richer countries. And that is, of course, a difference to the way that we tend to think about CBAM normally, but we think it is a condition under which we can actually invite and incentivize also lower income countries to join such a coalition. The second pillar, and again this is a full chapter by Bolton and Kleinhuis, explains the general idea here of this climate finance coalition is that there is an incentive for countries, for groups of countries to fund the decarbonization, the electrification and the green transition in the rest of the world because they benefit themselves. It's basically the classical North argument. There are incentives for countries to fund the decarbonization to the extent that we benefit all from the reduced risks of climate change to our own countries. Now, one of the questions is, what does this cost in order for this incentive to be large enough to actually generate the funding? And this chapter here calculates in detail how much it would cost to do the transition in the rest of in emerging markets and low-income countries, and then calculates what it would cost a coalition of advanced countries, including China. And this, the answer to that turns out to be 0.2% of GDP. So that would be, this is a very ambitious, of course, funding proposal, but that is one of the most, in that sense, most ambitious ways to think about how much would we need in order to actually achieve the task of decarbonizing not only our own advanced countries, but also the rest of the world. If China is not part of the deal, if the US is not part of the deal, which we are assuming, then it becomes, of course, for the rest of the advanced countries more expensive, but it is still in their interest, which is what this chapter explains. Then the third pillar is the green industrial partnerships. This is where Simone and Jeremy also have their own hands in this chapter. And it is about, Jean already gave the gist of it, it is about industrial green collaborations across borders. So basically making, not transporting green energy, but transporting green products, having coalitions of the type where value chains are extended into downstream industries, into countries that have the endowments to produce green products effectively and cheaper, in fact. And finally, the fourth pillar, which also requires coalitions because it requires a sufficient amount of countries to be interested in participating in this redesign. But this proposes a redesign of nature and carbon markets as a way to fund both nature and carbon, restoring nature and removing carbon, especially in the countries where this is most plentiful and cheapest to do. But there is also a second way of thinking about carbon, and this is the fact that carbon removals from the atmosphere can come in two types, and there are lots of people who actually would like to come to use the technological route, and that's why I just wanted to show this graph here. Technology, yes, can remove carbon from the atmosphere, but it is doing so at present at very, very small scale. So a 0.004 million tons of CO2 are currently removed by DACs, so direct air capture technologies. By comparison, the planet does have a technology and has developed it over millions of years, which is very effective. It's called photosynthesis, and it is how nature fixes carbon and removes it from the atmosphere and eventually puts it down into the Earth crust, where we find it and dig it up again after millions of years. But the point is that both of these technologies will be needed in order to create negative emissions, and we have a chapter on on how to stimulate more investment into technological solutions. That is chapter 7 by the Potsdam Institute, Edenhofer and his group, and they make a proposal on how to integrate this into the ETS in the form of future carbon removals, and creating therefore incentives for having for creating such technological solutions. It is not a trivial innovation, because it would also require some regulatory and credibility mechanism and regulation around it, but it is an extremely important, and it is something that the EU, this falls a bit outside the scope of the rest of the book, but it's something that the EU can do it on their own, on our own now. And then finally, the nature markets. Jean has already alluded to it. Nature and biodiversity and carbon are intimately related. Life creates, fixes carbon, uses carbon, and deposits carbon. But very often also when we have nature-based solutions which are focused on carbon in today's carbon markets, the animal basically comes with it and is not compensated. This is the example I'm giving here on the right, planting biodiverse forests in Panama. You cannot take the animal out of the nature, or otherwise it's a zoo. But the idea is these things very often come as a bundle, but we are not treating them as a bundle. And partly because the carbon market, on carbon, a ton is always a ton, independently of where you emit it or where you extract it. But a frog is not a frog, where a frog in the Amazon is not a frog here in Belgium, and we cannot compensate between the two. So we need systems, and this is what the present carbon markets are not really doing well, in order to integrate these two types of problems or solutions. But also present carbon markets, and this is well known, are suffering from many challenges. I'm citing a few here. The most important one is baseline integrity, the question that we do need a baseline for most of the avoidance projects in order to be able to calculate the ton that is being avoided in terms of emissions, and this will always be subject to difficult choices that can be disputed. Our carbon market design is based on provision projects, where the baseline is not the problem. The baseline is what you have, and you are essentially, what you are funding is the increase both in carbon and in biodiversity. And there are a number of important design factors, jurisdictional design factors that are market innovations. Jurisdictional approaches to create scale and to avoid leakage. Equity-based instrument, moving from a credit to an equity-based market. A primary market and its design is explained in detail in the paper, in order to make sure that, like projects, both nature and carbon can be accounted for. And finally, public market governance. So with these innovations, we think that a lot of the scaling problems can be overcome, trust can be created, but we may also need, in addition, additional mechanisms to boost demand. And I'll leave it at that. As I said, this is more of a teaser than an explainer. However, you see how it fits together, these different proposals in parallel, and how they can, different coalitions can be built around them. I thank you, look forward to discussion. And I would also like to finish by saying I'm really grateful for the collaboration we have between CEPR and Bruegel. Now this is this is a repeat. We are already thinking about the next Paris report, and we are of course grateful that we can call this Paris report because the Paris arrangement is what anchors us all here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea, and I think this feeling is of course shared on the Bruegel side. Thank you, Jean, for this presentation. Not easy to condense 400 pages into a presentation, so thank you for making this effort. And let's then try to now link these ideas with the pressing policy questions we are now facing. And maybe, Kurt, if I may start with you, this idea of coalitions of the willings, of course, is underpinned by the idea that the big emitters, that the big polluters are willing to join forces with others out there and try to make a change. Now, when we look at Europe, and when we look also at our internal debates, often we hear the speaking point, we only matter today for what, 6% of global emissions, so why should we care? Why should we make this effort? So how would you respond to that? And maybe also, if I may push you on this, what do you think are our leverage to mobilize others across the globe? The floor is yours.
No, happy to go into this, but first let me thank all the authors for the fantastic input in this report. There's a lot to eat and drink in it, and we'll digest it because we need new ideas on what we can do internationally to get the rest of the world on board. Because, as you rightly say, Simone, we represent 6% of global emissions. It continues to decline. We were 15% in 1990, 6% today. Just to put things in perspective, 6% is also our share of the world population, which is also declining. And if you look at our share of global imports of fossil fuels, we are at between 13 and 15%, and also declining. So just to put things in perspective. But we often get this question now, why should we care? Why should we do all this effort if the rest of the world is not following and we're only 6%? Well, first of all, I think we have to clearly say that we do this not because of the planet only. We do this because it is in our own interests. We don't do this only anymore for ecology. It's really about economy, security, and sovereignty. Basically, succeeding in this clean transition, as we now call it, is existential for us. I think the whole climate and decarbonization agenda, soon with the adaptation agenda added to it, is basically a big innovation and investment shock that we bring to our economy, which we need to modernize our industry and to make sure that we increase our productivity levels. It's exactly as Mr. Draghi has said. We need investment and innovation. That's what the climate agenda, the decarbonization ambition is bringing, and that will secure, hopefully, our competitiveness in the future. Secondly, it's also a question of sovereignty. I mentioned the imports of fossil fuels. We are a very big importer of fossil fuels. We pay a hefty price for this, and we have seen also in recent times what situations it brings us in. If we continue to be so dependent on imports of fossil fuels. There's also a very important social dimension to this, because with the increase of global warming and all the effects from climate change, it's actually the less well-off in our society that will suffer most. So this whole decarbonization agenda has to be coupled also with a socially fair agenda. And lastly, I would say it also links to the security agenda. We're very much, and rightly so, looking at the threats from the east of Europe. But we've seen over the summer what happens in the south of Europe, with 1 million hectares of forests being burned. So it's also a very strong security dimension. And I should say that, and this is often forgotten, but we're not doing badly in Europe, not only on the climate agenda, but we continue steadily to reduce our emissions. Our unemployment levels are historically low. We have seen a tripling of investment in clean energy since the launch of the European Green Deal. Actually, the clean tech tracker that Bruegel publishes regularly shows the increase of investment. And funnily enough, the countries that benefit most from it are Hungary and Poland, of all member states. We still continue to have a trade surplus, which some big leaders in the world hate us for. And even if you look at manufacturing, our industrial manufacturing share of GDP is still much higher than that of the US, for example. Now, this is not to say, tout va bien, Madame la Marquise. Definitely not. We have serious problems, including and notably for our energy-intensive industries. And what we're doing there now is to make sure that we have the right answers, policy measures to this with the Clean Industrial Deal. And it's actually the climate agenda that enables and allows us to do things that would otherwise not be possible. For example, the Clean Industrial State Aid Framework, where we now for the first time allow subsidies to companies for their energy prices on condition of investment in decarbonization. So what it means internationally, and I are very close with this, is that we are condemned to succeed with our clean transition for our own economic and social interests, but also as a model for the rest of the world to follow. Because if we give up and we waver, a continent like Europe that is not endowed with fossil energy, then the rest of the world will say, okay, see, Europe can't do it. If we succeed and we show that we preserve our quality of life, our prosperity, our competitiveness, that will be leadership by example. And that still very much matters. But of course, we need to engage much more actively than we have already done in the past. On climate diplomacy, on energy, on industry, etc., at various levels, multilateral, that's where the COP remains very important. It is necessary, but by far not sufficient. So we also need to work at plurilateral level. The CBAM helps us in this. It was mentioned by several. We are continuing to also mainstream environmental and climate dimensions in trade agreements, for example. Mercosur will be talked of today. That's why the college will take a bit longer today. But also bilaterally, we need to make sure that we go for win-win partnerships, not to protect the climate, but to make the clean transition a business case that is very lucrative, both for economy and for the planet. And that's why we are working now on clean trade and investment partnerships, where we try to bring together three pillars: access to our market for clean or green products, mobilizing investment by Europe into those partner countries, and regulatory cooperation so that we can align rules, regulations, and policies.
Thank you, Kurt. Thank you for this examination of where Europe stands. And thank you for mentioning the Clean Tech Tracker. By the way, just a parenthesis, the Clean Tech Tracker of Bruegel is being launched today in its new website, and you can actually play with it just outside. There is a big monitor when you can play with it and see really all the data that we have been compiling in there, and that's of course also available on our website. closed parenthesis. Thank you for mentioning the importance of the COP. And that's exactly on this issue that I would like to possibly turn to Laurence, because as of today, I think we have 68 days to go before the start of COP30 in Brazil. So Laurence, can you help us identify which would be the ingredients of success at the COP, and maybe what role do you see Europe playing in this important meeting? Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. And again, I want really to refer to this extraordinary exercise that you have led to publish all this thinking at a moment where there is so much doubt on global governance, on climate policies, just to take stock of where we are and how we can go further. I think it was really a very, very important initiative. I am very happy to have contributed in a way, and I will not go back to what we wrote in the paper, but I think it's good to take stock of what we have in Paris, why finally Paris Agreement has in a way made a difference. There is a pre and post, but now what we do now, which is your question now. On one side, of course, you take the news every day, and every day you get a little bit more depressed about how climate change, climate policy, and then the preparation of the COP30 are now captured by an incredible polarization of politics around that. It's just crazy because, again, climate change ignores politics totally. Of course, you can ignore science, but it's not because you close a data center or the research institutes that are documenting what is happening that it disappears. But it's this contrast between the attack against science, again, the policy on climate change now more and more, and how we have to prepare for trying to find solution to that problem. And you know, it has cost a lot already. Huh? I think 2023, 400 billion of cost that has been measured by the insurance company. 2024 is much higher. Most of it, of course, is not insured, and then you have seen the insurance sector saying we cannot go anymore. So pressing, but then what is the condition for what we can do? Out of this book and this reflection altogether, we see that we have gone so far with the Paris Agreement, and we need advancing other mechanisms. Jean and you, Beatrice, you have set up some options, in particular on these sort of specific coalitions. But we have seen that in the past, these coalitions have been, in a way, lacking teeth. Anyway, the Paris Agreement has indirect teeth through, of course, domestic legislation. So I think this point should be called back again. We need strong national legislation to implement global agreements, and that is the conclusion of the last memo of the ICE, the International Court of Justice. States are responsible, they are accountable of what they have signed. In Paris Agreement, it's not enough to have signed. They have the obligation of implementing it. So that's one I think we should double down on. It's good to have ambitious targets. It's very important to have the national enforcement mechanism that are due. And that, of course, the Paris Agreement structure that imposes that. And we need, of course, to continue some advances that had been made in the previous COP, in particular on tripling, of course, renewable energy by 2030 and doubling energy efficiency, for example. We have, of course, to deliver a credible finance package at COP30. And again, against all odds that we are seeing in the press every day. And the financial package, of course, was very clear maybe some years ago, through in particular the big initiatives that was launched by the Prime Minister at that time, but still Prime Minister of the Barbados, Maya Motley, to say we need a global reform of the international financial system, plus specific additional resources, in particular the global solidarity levies I'm particularly working on, aviation, maritime, and maybe other issues like fossil fuel producers, and in particular on the methane emissions, or even on crypto and AI, which of course are big, but applying polluter pay principle on the flows that are not, or the activities are not paying for that for the moment. And then, of course, all the concessional and blended finance at scale. That will be, anyway, a good conversation. I think we are making some progress on what does it mean, guarantees for the private sector to invest, in particular in emerging and developing countries where the cost of capital is still very high. And we begin to have some responses in particular. But at the same time, there have been, of course, the big pushback, in particular by, of course, the US administration against having climate finance policy strong, in particular, for example, at World Bank and the connected, multilateral banks. I do think that for the first time in the COP, the question of resilience, adaptation, and then the problem of the cost of the damage will be front and center. It was not meant to do so, to be so. And of course, the big floods that have really affected so much Brazil have changed the way this presidency is preparing this COP. The costs were and are enormous. It had been enormous in 2023, 2024, 2025. And so I hope we will make this front and center, that it's not costs of the future, it's the actual costs that are significant macroeconomically speaking. That's why this report and this collaboration between Bruegel and CPR is so important. Now, what we can do to improve implementation of Paris Agreement, which is fine. So we have the pillar of national legislation, which of course is useful because judiciary plays a role, including for companies' reputation and risk. But we have to of course move forward. And now we see that for many, because of the polarization of climate change as an issue, and I see that even in my country in France, where, climate change is sort of elite policy against people, at least presented like by some groups. We need places where we collect the actors that want to go further. So I see coalition of the willing, but with what kind of mechanism that ensure accountability of all these participants. That's why at COP30, we will try to propose a forum, implementation forum, that will be, of course, not ruled by the consensus rule and not government only, but having all the implementers of the Paris Agreement at the table, but with certain rules of accountability, transparency, and delivery that condition the entry into the club. It is so different levels. We were talking in the report of the carbon clubs and many places of the book. This is not only on the carbon club, it's a little bit broader, because it's as well to have, of course, not only the government that can decide on the tax, but local authority, region, states, companies that are engaged, and they have plans for emission reduction, and they do it, by the way. But there is no place where this is recognized, measured, tracked, to know where we are and where finally the economic trends are developing. So I think it would be a huge innovation if we can get there. Not sure we can get there. In addition to that, I think we need to have something really about following closely the cost of climate damage, because of course that will be a strong incentive for all government to, in a way, counterbalance the message they got from, of course, the incumbent that doesn't want to change, and now in a way threatening jobs and economic development, where in reality we are paying now already a very high cost. So that's important. I said that in Brussels some months ago on the insurance company to stand up, to say how much they see it's costing now, and it will cost very soon now, and now, because they have all the data available. And it will be very important that in the different places we begin to know and to integrate that in the policy. So now, finally, what is Europe's role? I was very hopeful, I can say that very frankly, to have very early on a strong Europe, pressuring in particular key emerging countries to deliver. Now, of course, US is out, but that's not the first time. We had Kyoto, and then we had Trump 1, and then now we have Trump 2. But who can show the lead if Europe doesn't deliver that, of course, progress that Kurt has mentioned? We are doing it, and it's not costing our economic development, not at all. But we need two things. One, to be ambitious on our targets, and that the 2040 targets importance, and not in 3 months' time, but in September, when China will publish its NDC, and what will happen if Europe doesn't show up with a clear plan? I think it's really, really worrying, frankly, and not my activist side is really just purely diplomatic analysis. The second element is we need friends. I don't know if anybody in Europe thinks that US can be a friend on our industrial and trade policy and security, well, security, question mark. But on trade and on industrial policy, you listen to this administration, to the one who are inspiring this administration. And you know, Europe is the enemy. Why? Because we want a Green Deal to continue. We want green industrialization. We want, yes, renewable energy against fossil fuel. So we are the representation of what this administration hates. So I think we need friends, and I think you refer, Kurt, to Mercosur. It's super important. In my view, it's a more important thing we should do to accelerate the agreement there, and to, of course, to encourage mutual recognition of the efforts on deforestation, on clean industry, on renewable energy. And I think we need the framing for that through CBAM structure or mutual recognition. Probably we have to adapt and to adjust. But, you know, looking at Latin America, and I will stop there because I don't want to be too long, but look at Mexico today. It could be a perfect friend for Europe. And the rest of Latin America, really, frankly, could be so. Look at Asia. You see any minister of energy in Asia calling for more renewable energy. We need to offer critical material agreements that can, like we did with Chile, like we tried to do with South Africa. But we need to offer a template of what is just and fair co-development with these emerging countries. And I think we have all the capacity to do so. I remember EIB previously being very vocal on that. We need development banks that offers that template. So I hope this will be the discourse and the statement of the European Union at COP30. If we are not there, nobody will be there. Countries are afraid of US retaliation. Countries are afraid to go there because of US retaliation. So, you know, we have to stand up. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurence. And I'm sure that we will certainly manage to pick up some of these points also during the conversation afterwards. Now, you stressed, I think twice, the importance of implementation and also the role of companies. And Francesca, maybe let me then turn to you on this point, because when we talk about coalitions of the willings and in general about global action for climate and nature, at the end of the day, who needs to deliver, namely when it comes to climate mitigation, are the companies at the front line to make the investment decisions, to roll out the technologies we need to pursue this transition. Now, how do you see really being the most important ingredients of success for these public-private collaborations we actually need to unleash these private investments across the world, namely when it comes to mitigation actions and renewable energy? The floor is yours.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks for inviting me today. And thanks to the panelists for the engaging session. I think we've been mentioning COP30. COP30 will be in Brazil. Brazil is a very relevant renewable player and is an emerging economy. And I think that would be a perfect spot to discuss a little bit how what we've been discussing this morning on climate action and natural action can be somehow a driver for growth. Sometimes they're seen as a constraint, whilst this might be a little bit reverse. What we've been happening as of now when we talk about the energy transition, for example, is that sometimes we refer to mitigation actions and we forget about adaptation measures, whilst mitigation action and adaptation measures nowadays are not competing among themselves. So they're both very present, and I think they will both be very present in COP30 as discussion. And in the end, as operators of the power sector, basically almost everywhere we're looking for implementing CO2-free generation, but also investment for getting our distribution grids and transmission grids more resilient also to extreme events, of course. And one other thing that we are very much working on is to engage customers in understanding better what is their power in terms of energy management, because a conscious customer is anyhow supporting the path that we've been choosing. If concerning data, we've been talking with Kurt before about data. So we saw on renewables, as you were asking, this year, 2024, led to a almost 600 gigawatt addition worldwide. Most of it was in China for dimension, but this was the greatest jump we had so far. And another important data was that in June 2025, so 2 months ago, in EU, solar generation reached the 22%, which was the highest so far. But as the graphs at the beginning were showing us, we have a sort of decoupling in between advanced economy and emerging economies. So new actions have to be implemented. For what concerns ourselves as Enel, we are present in 28 countries, so we have definitely a global perspective, and we serve more than 54 million customers, and we've been decreasing our direct emission intensity on generation by 70% in the past 8 years. So the engagement was pretty strong, though this has been coupled with a strong financial performance. And in the next years, currently, we are committed on investing almost 43 billion euros in the current year and next 2 years for getting ahead with our decision, which are investing in flexibility, investing in selected renewable energy where we are present, and strengthening very much our grids, because without grids, we know that decarbonization of the sector and electrification is going to be definitely a little bit difficult. What I want to stress here is also that this is a journey. So we know this is a journey. We know the things that must be done are pretty clear. We know that the pace is a little bit debatable as well. This is the most important path to follow. But what is important is that issues are arising while we evolve. So, for example, we were mentioning Brazil, Chile, for example. We have registered a very high rate of curtailment. And when curtailment is in place and investment into transmission grids or localization of demand have not been following the development of renewables, this offers constraints for the generators that have to bear risk, and this is not going to favor next investments. So I think it's important that in our path we keep a very close eye on conditions that are changing, and we keep also a flexible approach to how regulation and market should go hand in hand. And this is very relevant also for new services. For example, we have invested in flexibility, leading to 9.8 gigawatt of demand response globally from Asia to the States. And this is engaging our customers, industrial customers, in participating the management of our grids, leading their efforts also to accelerated decarbonization, because everything is optimized during the grid systems. We are engaged in long-term contracts like PPA that were very much discussed in the market design here in Europe as well. And overall, I think that coalition has their relevance. We are in very many coalitions, and it's important that the targets that we agree on are shared, are committed that implementation and negotiation go hand in hand. So the president for COP30 has said that he would like the COP30 to be a place where negotiation and actions come together, a platform where urgency, equity, and implementation is always there. And I think this is the right way to manage every day.
Thank you, Francesca, for that. And I think that with this intervention, we have now widely discussed different aspects of the issue we are tackling today. And I think it's high time to open this up to Q&A. So there will be mics going around the room. And please, I already see a first question here in the front from Heather Grabby, and then a second one on the second row. Please, Heather.
Thank you very much. Heather Graby from Bruegel. So we started with a presentation of the case for coalitions of the willing as an alternative to a failing international governance system. And Laurence made the remark that coalitions of the willing usually lack teeth, and that it's only really national legislation with the force of law and with governments actually implementing what they've committed to that makes a difference. So how to make that passage between the two now? Is it possible to have coalitions of the willing which still lead to implementation, which still go into communities of law like the European Union, even regional bodies like Mercosur? What would be a new governance mechanism for doing this? Could a climate club, for example, have some kind of legal force? Or do we move away from the concept of law as being the primary enforcement mechanism to other things, other kinds of incentives? Not so much tying hands, but for example, offering financial incentives of different kinds. What's the way to get the investment that would make coalitions of the willing politically attractive enough to ensure implementation?
Thank you, Heather. Maybe we can group these with a second question just on the back there. Yeah.
Thank you. Christian Guimers from Robert Triffin International, University of Louvain. I have two linked questions on the macro-financial framework which is behind this coalition. According to most of the model, decarbonizing requires an increase worldwide of at least 3% of GDP during at least several decades. So that means that the saving rate for the world has to be down. Do you think that it would be Africa, Latin America, or Asia able to cut their consumption level for making room for saving? And the other part of this question is on the monetary side. Do you think that with the dollar system prevailing and which is now increasing with Mr. Trump, which is pumping in the net world saving for consuming in the US, do you think that dollar system is compatible with decarbonization?
Thank you so much. Jean, Beatrice, would you like to react to any of these points? Jean, if you want to go first.
We don't take the question on Slido yet.
Not yet. I will do the next one.
I'd like to respond to Heather because she said essentially we need coalitions of willing. Are they a substitute or are they a complement to the multilateral framework? And I think they are a complement. I mean, it's at a time where the multilateral framework is weakening and has weakened. You need to find mechanisms to strengthen the commitment to action. And there can be these coalitions of the willing with the incentive attached, be it for the CBAM or the sort of climate clubs, or be it for the decarbonization of the South with support for investing in the decarbonization specifically of the power sector. But those cannot work without the existence of this umbrella system of global commitment. So that would be very difficult to make it happen. So I think we need both, and we don't think as those coalitions are willing as substitutes, but rather as ways to strengthen the multilateral commitments.
Thank you, Jean. Beatrice, would you like to jump in?
Yes, just very briefly. I think it responds a bit to both questions. I mean, in order for somebody to participate for a country to participate in a coalition, there needs to be the following calculation: benefits are greater than costs. And so then the question is, what are the benefits, what are the costs? Are they calculated in the short run? Are they narrow or broad? If a narrow cost and benefit can be enough, then you could have a climate club of the type we fund the decarbonization of the whole everybody else. If the cost of that is so low that the benefit to us in terms of a lower risk of climate change to us is high enough. So. Benefits greater than costs. But if that is not enough, if that doesn't work out, then you probably need wider types of costs and benefits. Then you have to go across funding, across trade, finance, and maybe also put other things on the table at the same time on both the cost and benefit side. And that's why these coalitions may be variable in geometry. But then there is a third component that costs and benefits may have a time dimension, and that's where a certain amount of stability and trust does again play a role. So coalitions of willing will not be possible if there is absolutely no trust that there is some kind of stability, and that's when we talk about friends. And the last element is that what if one of the players who is actually not in the coalition wants to increase the cost for somebody who wants to participate? And some of the US behavior seems to be going in this direction. That makes, of course, the costs higher and the possibility of forming coalitions lower. So it is a tricky endeavor to get it right, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you, Beatrice. And I would then move to Slido to see what the questions are there. And there is one that is the most popular, which I think would be a perfect question for Kurt and also for Francesca. So the question is, developing countries are cost sensitive. When investing in clean tech, they buy Chinese. What is the EU planning to ensure climate policy strengthens EU tech leadership? So, Kurt, that would be probably for you, and maybe, Francesca, what should the EU do can be a follow-up question. So, Kurt, if you want to go on that.
It's a really great question that we are grappling with. I'll be very honest about this. First, I should say I fully agree with Jean that coalitions of the willing are complements to the multilateral framework. And by the way, it's not as if there's nothing existing yet. We have a series of coalitions of the willing. For example, the global methane pledge was launched. We have just energy transition partnerships. We have a climate club that we're trying to bring really to more fruition. On the international carbon markets, or discussion on Article 6 of the UNFCCC implementation or the Paris Agreement implementation, and our openness to flexibility for international carbon credits will probably also create such a coalition of the willing. If we couple that with instruments like CBAM, which are very, very encouraging for us to see, because we see a lot of economies in the world moving into carbon pricing one way or another. So we need to strengthen that even more. What we are learning is that as soon as you institutionalize too much these coalitions of the willing, it becomes much slower, much more difficult. But at the same time, without the trust long term, it also doesn't work. So we have to find new governance models, I think, for these coalitions of the willing. On your question of strengthening EU technology leadership, well, I think there, again, the report of Mr. Draghi gives us a very good blueprint. It is not possible for Europe now to say we have to master all the production of all clean technologies in Europe. It's very clear that on solar panels, for example, it would be quite counter-intuitive and ineffective if we now start investing in solar panel production and then try to export this to the rest of the world. It may be different for other sectors, like electrolyzers, for example, for the production of green hydrogen, maybe for new upcoming technologies like in geothermal, where we could still have a chance. I think there are a couple of areas which are really critical for Europe, like batteries, which we really need to get right in Europe, not in Europe alone, but also in Europe, and then see how we can create markets internationally for clean tech produced in Europe, but not only produced in Europe. With our Net Zero Industry Act, we have said that we have a goal of producing 40% roughly of all the clean tech we need in Europe to be produced in Europe, and that's still what we will try to realize.
Thank you, Kurt. Francesca, would you like to add on that?
Just quickly, on the last point on technology, you know that we've been developing with the support of the Commission our new manufacturing of solar panel in Catania. This is for sure something that assemble and manufacture solar panels in EU. I think that targets are many in EU, and as the Draghi report also was saying, we need to choose the strategic industry sectors where we want to achieve prioritizing our leadership, and after that link all the different targets in all different and numerous industrial and regulation adjustments and actions.
Thank you, Francesca. I'm mindful of time, but I would really like to close with a question to you, Laurence, because several points on Slido point to the relationship between the EU and China. Now, before the summer, we had an important joint statement on climate, the only joint statement we managed to get out of that important meeting. So how do you see that relationship moving forward in the coming months? And how do you see Europe and China partnering at the COP?
I think we have to have a differentiated approach. We have to recognize that we cannot do the transition in Europe without China. That's very evident. Just batteries. We could do batteries in Europe, but we need the advance on technology of China to do it properly. If not, we'll fail. But that's totally possible to reverse the type of investment relationship we had in the 20 years ago to China. It has to be reversed on the other side, that they do technology transfer and organization too. The second element is, China can do a lot in emission reduction. All the think tanks, both Chinese and outside, can say that by 2035, a reasonable decrease, absolute reduction of emission could be from 30% to 35% compared to 2005 levels. But we need to make some pressure. For the moment, when I look what is happening in the press today on the EU capacity to stand up and say we are together, I think we are not doing the job properly, at least at my assessment. Why? Because China needs absolutely the implementation of Paris Agreement to develop its technology. They started, I repeat that every time, in 2010, after Copenhagen, to say this is the way to go. They have invested from there on all the supply chain of green technology. They need Paris Agreement to be implemented for absorbing what they have decided to do. So in a way, we are normally rational allies. But then the problem is a rhythm and the way to go together. And that's where I think hesitation from the EU side is not beneficial for us, because anyway, they will go ahead. Now, we can offer as well. So China is an important decision, and I know it's very difficult politically. So we have to find a way to balance interest, as we try, in a way, to balance interest with US. But then I think referring to this partnership, both of you, Jean and Beatrice, referred to, and Kurt as well, we need, again, to find other friends. This world of the coalition of the willing is no more, one hegemony. It's plurilateral. So we have to play like the others. India is playing that. South Africa is playing that, Brazil is playing that, we should play the same. So I think it's a moment maybe to gather energies and understanding that this norm setting that EU was able to do in the past can go ahead, but we need friends, and that's something that the diplomacy of EU has to develop, because it's linked with trade, which that's the way the coalition of the willing can be really enforced. But we have investment, we have public procurement, we have many tools to get friends. And that is not only China. And that, I think, the type of dynamism I hope we will see soon. But that's why I insist. I know that the French government today, maybe the German government, are not in favor of being ambitious by too soon on the 2040 targets. Is the only tool we have for the moment with our internal market to push the China in the direction they are going anyway, but to go them further and faster.
2040 target as key to Europe credibility moving ahead here. Thank you, Laurence. Message taken, and thank you all for being with us. Thank you to you, all speakers, for being with us. Lunch is being served outside, and then there will be the follow-up session here on multilateralism. So see you later. Thank you so much.